All right, today we're going to talk about speciation. Speciation is the formation of a new species, right? And so, remember, if you're of the same species, that means the definition of individuals of the same species is that they can reproduce and they can reproduce and produce fertile offspring. So what happens though, if you so this is thought to be, if you do a DNA analysis of every living thing that we know of, what you see is that everything is related. And what's interesting is you can see in this picture here, you can see how everything is related. So this is where they believe the origin of life occurred, and then you can see these lines that are coming off it, right? So the longer the line is, the longer it took to evolve from this particular time, right, or from this particular center. And so, humans or animals are over here. Here are bacteria, fungi, and so they can trace everything back based off of DNA comparisons. And so, what we do know is, and if you just look around you, there's different species, right? And so, what happened is, over time, there must have been new species that evolved. And so the question there, the idea of speciation is, how does this happen? And so the main concept we're going to go over today is that in order for a new species to evolve, it has to come from a previous species. And so they kind of break apart, right? Or they separate somehow. So there needs to be some type of isolation or some reproductive isolation where two populations divide and they can't reproduce, and then they start adapting to their different environments, right? Okay? And so the key is to think of isolation. Once a species gets isolated from each other, they start evolving separately, and at some point, if they try to come back together and have offspring, they can't, and therefore at that point they become a new species. There are three types of isolating mechanisms, so three ways. One is behavioral. So basically, the behavior isolates the populations. So this is behavioral isolation. So here you have an eastern meadowlark and a western meadowlark. They look almost exactly alike, and I don't know a lot about birds, but they look exactly alike. They live in somewhat close areas. But what's interesting is the reason why these are two different species is they've evolved over time, where the eastern meadowlark song, the male song that attracts the females, doesn't attract the western meadowlark female. And so the eastern meadowlark male will sing its song and will attract other female eastern meadowlarks, but the western meadowlark female isn't attracted. And at one point, they were a species. They were one species, but somehow the song of one and the other became different, where they only attracted a certain, and so they become two different species. And so this is behavioral because their mating song is a behavior, right? Geographic isolation, so what happens a lot of times, so in this case, they're separated by geography. Sometimes something happens, in this case, this is the Grand Canyon, and so these are two different squirrels that got separated. They're actually I forgot the name of the squirrels, but they were one species at one point, and then after the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River cut through the Grand Canyon, they were separated, and they started, and you can see they look very different today, and they started only reproducing amongst themselves, and in fact, they adapted to their own environment, and so they look different, and they're different species. The last one is temporal. Temporal means time. And so this is an isolation due to time. So you have isolation due to behavior, isolation due to geography, and then isolation due to time. And so these are two toads. And what happens is one is only able to reproduce in late summer, or one reproduces in early summer. So they never are able to reproduce with each other at the same time. So they become different species. What's interesting is scientists have actually taken these toads into the laboratory and actually have found that there's an ability for them to produce an offspring, but the offspring is not fertile. So these are the three mechanisms that can cause a new species to form.